Okay, welcome back. In this video we're going to take a look at the EV3 color sensor. This is a brand new sensor for the robotics kit. In the NXT kit we had before, it was called a light sensor. This is actually a color sensor. We can use it in 3 different modes: in color mode, in reflected light mode, and in ambient light mode. You can see that I've got it mounted up at the front of the bot, facing down. For the examples in today's video, we're going to use it in reflected light mode. We're going to place it on the table, and we're going to be able to tell the difference between the white areas and the black lines on the mat. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we start programming, I do want to show you one thing. I just want to make sure that you see that the color sensor, again, is facing straight down towards the mat, and I've mounted it on the lowest part of the bot, the part of the bot that's going to be closest to the mat. I did that because if you'll see, the color sensor is going to emit a red light, and that's going to be facing down to the mat. And since we're using this in reflected light mode, there needs to be a couple of millimeters for the light to shine down to the mat and then reflect back up so that the bot can tell the difference between the white spaces on the mat and the black lines on the mat. So again, you can take a look and see how I have it mounted. Just pretty much flush with the bottom of that. You can mount it however you'd like, as long as you get it close down to the mat and make sure it's perpendicular to the mat, and it's going to work best in that mode. Okay, before we jump into the software, there is one thing I want us to take a look at. On the brick, there's a port view that we can use, and I'm going to scroll over to the right and choose port view. And what this is going to do is give us a readout, a live readout of what the sensor is seeing. So we can see here that in port 1, we have the color sensor plugged in, and it's giving us a live readout. Right now it's 15%, 14% light, and if I move this bot around on the mat, you're going to see that it's going to give us different values. Now right now the sensor's over the white area and we're showing 51, 56, 60, 68, and it's just giving us a live readout. But as I bring it closer to the black line, we're going to see the value change dramatically, and it's going down below 20, here's 15, 16% reflected light. So there's a big difference between the reflected light coming from the white area of the mat and the black area of the mat, and you can see that. So just as a general rule, I'm going to remember that the white area of the mat is anything, let's just say 50% and higher, and this black line is going to be lower than 20, because we're like right now we're in the 15s, 14s. So anything higher than 50% we'll classify as white, and everything lower than 20% we're going to classify as black. And we're going to need to remember that whenever we get into the program. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
Okay, so we're in the software now. I've just created a brand new program and I've called it Reflected Light. And before we start programming, I just want to make sure that everything is still plugged in where it should be. I've noticed that my 2 large motors are still plugged into port A and B. The medium-sized motor is in port C, and now we have in port 1 showing our color sensor, and that's actually giving off a reflected light now of 54%. Keep in mind that this value showing of 54, 53% is the value coming off the table next to my computer. It's not the value coming off the table. So if I were to just move that a little bit into a different part of the table that was darker, you could see that value change dramatically. So just keep that in mind. This is giving us a live readout, but I do want to use the numbers from the mat, which were higher than 50 for the white and lower than 20 for the black. We're going to use the move tank block to move forward, and for this demo we're going to move everything pretty slow so you can see what's happening. So I'm going to change these to 10% power, and we're just going to run this forward or turn the motors on at 10% power until our color sensor detects a change in reflected light. So what we'll do is use this wait block, and we'll come in here and wait for the color sensor. We're going to put this in compare mode, and I mentioned that there are 3 different modes for this sensor: the color mode, reflected light, and an ambient light. Today we're going to use the reflected light mode, so I'm going to choose that one. And then we have a couple of values here that we need to fill in. What I want to do is the motors to move forward until we get to a dark line on the mat. So anything less than 20% reflected light is going to cause a change. So let's look at this. The motors are going to move forward at 10% power and wait until the value of the reflected light is less than 20. and then when that occurs, all we want to do is turn motors off. So very simple program. We want to run until we see that value of reflected light, which is going to be less than 20, and then we're going to stop motors. So I'm going to send this program and see how it works on the mat.
Okay, so with that simple program on there, what's going to happen is the motors are going to run forward indefinitely until the value coming from the color sensor is less than 20. And just a reminder, the value from the white was generally reporting back at more than 50, and this dark black line here was reporting back at values below 20. So hopefully our bot will be able to tell the difference. Let me go ahead and run it. Exactly, and as soon as it hits the dark values, the motors stop. Let's try it again from a slightly different angle. And that's exactly what we want. So that was just enough to test to make sure that the sensor was reporting back correct values. Let's go back into the software and do something a little bit more complex.
Alright, so the simple program worked. We were able to move forward until we got to the darker values of the black line, and then the motor stopped. So what we want to add on to that now is this move steering block. And what I want to program next is when it hits the line, I want it to kind of scoot back at an angle, back away from the black line and turn, and we'll try a different direction forward. So what we're going to do here is choose on for degrees. We want to choose to turn at an angle. And again, let's move this pretty slowly. So this turn is going to be at 20% power, and we're going to go negative because we want to back up 300 degrees and then stop. So we're going to move forward until we see the dark values of the line and then stop the motors, and then immediately begin backing up at a slight turn for 300 degrees, and let's see what that does.
Okay, so let's give this a quick test. The only thing we added on was a backup move after it hit the black line. So I'm going to run this program and we'll see if it does the backup move like I intended. And that's pretty close. I'm going to speed that back up just a little bit when we get back to the software. Eventually what I want to do is put the bot in the middle of this circle here, and even though there's no physical barricade, I want that to keep him inside the circle, even though he's going to try desperately to get out. So what we're going to do is run this, and I don't want him to give up very easily, so I want him to keep trying and trying and trying until he finds a break. So I want him to run this program over and over again, and we'll use something called a loop.
Okay, so I mentioned that I wanted to speed up the reverse move a little bit, so I'm just going to bump that up from 20% power to 35% power, and that's just going to make him back up a little bit faster than he is moving forward. And then what we're going to do next is try to put this in a loop so that he doesn't try to get out just once, he tries over and over and over again. To do that, we're going to use the flow control palette, and we'll choose a loop. This loop is going to go at the very beginning of our program, and you can see the block is quite a bit bigger, and all we need to do is select all of these items and drag them and drop them inside of the loop. And as you can probably guess, a loop just means we're going to do this over and over and over again. And the symbol here means unlimited, this infinity symbol. We can change that to do it only a certain number of times. If we want to choose count, we can have him only try, let's just say 5 times or whatever. And then this would limit the loops to 5 times through. But for this example, let's just let it go unlimited. So the only thing that's going to stop this loop is me pushing the stop button on the brick. So let's give this a try. I'm going to download and let's give it a try.
Okay, so we've got our program looped and ready to go. I'm going to set the bot in the middle of the circle, and what I'm hoping to see is for him to move forward until he gets to our line over here, and he's going to sense the dark values, scoot back, and then move forward again. Try it, see the dark values, move back, forward, and that will be an infinite loop until I stop the program. So let's give it a try and see what happens. Okay, perfect. So you can see that the program is looping like it should. He's moving forward slowly until he sees the dark value of the line, and then moves back and loops again. and he will continue to do that until I stop the program, and that program was a success. Let's go try something else.
Okay, so up to this point, we've been moving forward pretty slowly, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to make sure that the robot wasn't in too much of a hurry and just drive past the line. What I'd like to do is try to find a threshold for a faster speed where he can move faster forward but still not jump over the line. So I'm going to try moving that forward at 40% power, and we'll move backward again. We'll speed that up at 40% power as well. Send that program. The motor blocks haven't changed. All we've done is increase the power of the motors, which in turn should speed the bot up. Let's give it a try.
Okay, let's see if that increase to 40% power changes anything. I'm going to go ahead and put him inside the circle and run it, and let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see that even though that was quite a bit faster, he was still pretty responsive to the black line. So I'd say this experiment was a success. For one of our future videos, one of the weekly challenges, we will reprogram this color sensor so that it doesn't cause him to bounce back from the line, but acts like a magnet and will cause him to follow this line around on a path. But before we get to that point, I'd like for you to go ahead and try to program and see what kind of things you can come up with on your own.